Hey there, Vanessa from Biology Roots. I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to share with you my scope and sequence that I use for my biology curriculum and how you can use it or adjust it for your own needs. So, without further ado, your sequence may or may not depend on your personal preferences. It may already be determined by your department, but you can still pull some ideas from here. Also, if your state has adopted NGSS, then you are focusing on fewer topics, but going into more depth. So your scope and sequence might look a little bit different, and I'll show you what that might look like a little later on. Also, one thing to consider is that even though there are 180 school days total, you don't want to cram your entire curriculum into the 180 days. You want to leave yourself with a nice buffer at the end of the school year, a bank, so to speak, of days that you can cash in on should you need them. Okay, so before you get into the meat of the content, into the biology, it might be a good idea to review scientific method, lab safety, and graphing, regardless of what your standards are. And that also ties into not accounting for every single day of the school year when making your scope and sequence. Even in high school, I find that the kids could really benefit from a refresher. So I usually take 4 or 5 days in the beginning of the year to review this with them. If you can't, then you can at least just incorporate it as you go on, maybe spoon feed a little bit of graphing exercises in there as you get through the actual standards or performance expectations. Okay, so the sequence that I teach and why, it's all about scaffolding. So, what topics need to come before others? Which topics require prior knowledge? Basically, what should students already know in order to best understand a new topic? For example, you truly can't appreciate evolution unless you already have a solid grasp on genetics. So, using this mantra, this scaffolding idea, this is the sequence that I teach, all the way from biochemistry to classification. And maybe you don't necessarily teach every single subject here. If you don't teach population genetics, for example, you can just omit that and focus on the other subjects. I've color coded the subjects into four different big chunks, and that just depends on how closely related they are. So, cells, they're made up of the macromolecules, and so biochemistry should come before cells. Homeostasis, a lot of that has to do with cell transport, so that's all connected. And then that's how I start the school year. So that would be the first brick of the foundation for the biology course, so to speak. And then from there, we would move on to cell division, DNA, genetics, and protein synthesis. Protein synthesis can actually go before or after genetics. I've taught it both ways. I will say I honestly don't have a preference, but if you teach it after genetics, kids might be able to transcribe and translate flawlessly, but if you save it for after they've learned about inheritance, they understand the why and the what a little bit better instead of just using the charts and matching the DNA and mRNA and tRNA. They might understand what it all means and get the big picture. So that's just one perk of saving it for after genetics, but I've done it both ways. From there, we move on to cell respiration, photosynthesis, and ecology. So these guys are all related because they've got their cycles, they've got energy flow and matter flow. But ecology, I actually would often save him for the very end of the school year. Having taught up in Massachusetts, that's when the weather was guaranteed to be nice, and it was nice to be able to go outside and do some hands-on activities. So I would say that ecology is not as tightly bound to cell respiration and photosynthesis as some of these other guys are. Evolution, population genetics, and classification, those are a nice way to end the school year. It's all about biological relationships and unity. And so we save that for last. And they have to, have a solid grasp on environment and ecology and genetics and DNA before we get into evolution and classification. So it's a nice way to end the year. Okay, so scope, don't scramble. We have 180 school days, and you don't want to find yourself with 10 days left. There's a final exam saying to yourself, oh my goodness, I have not even gotten to X, Y, and Z yet. If you have a nice scope with your sequence, it's a nice way to stay on track to avoid that from happening. This is a general guideline for the number of days that I spend on these topics. It is not written in stone, but it can help you help keep you from scrambling at the end of the year. So, for example, genetics. If we look at genetics in the middle here, 12 to 21 days. And again, this just depends on your class and your state standards and what you're expected to teach. So say that you're on day 23 of genetics and you haven't even started reviewing yet. You might say to yourself, okay, well, normally I'd spend 3 days reviewing because it's a really big topic and we cover every piece of genetics and every type of inheritance pattern. But since I'm on day 23 and I haven't started reviewing yet, I might shrink my review down from 3 days to 2 days or something like that. So, again, just a general guide, not written in stone, but to help keep you on track. Um, and my biology curriculum contains unit plans for each unit and it maps out each resource. So that's where I'm pulling these numbers from. If you notice, the minimum number of days to get through the entire course is 122. Nobody does that. I would say that's basically impossible. But maybe you'll only spend 5 days on biochemistry, the minimum, but then you find yourself going way over the 12 days for cell organelles. So you kind of want to aim more for an average time. The maximum is 164. Why not 180? Again, it's that buffer that we're aiming for, that bank that we want to be able to cash out if we need to. Like in my genetics example, you might go over. If we crammed this in, you wouldn't have any time for that to happen. You wouldn't have time for any field trips, for any state testing, for maybe you want to review for the midterm and final. You won't be able to do that if you account for each and every school day, so on and so forth. Or maybe, an experiment takes a few days longer than you anticipated, something like that. So it's really important to give yourself that buffer. And in this case, you have a 16-day buffer, which is a really nice, healthy buffer. And if you go over it, so what? You'll still have time to do the things that you need to do and get through the content. Okay, so these are the performance expectations, or the units, I should say, not the expectations, but the units pulled from the high school NGSS life science topics. And I do have a download available for both middle school and high school NGSS Life Science, which is much more specific than this. This is just general for the sake of saving time, but in the download, you'll be able to see all the subtopics and approximately how many days you might want to spend on each. High school NGSS, the performance expectation on cell organelles is not there, but I really do think it's a good idea to take 4 or 5 days at the beginning of the year to review cell organelles. In the same token, scientific method, graphing, and so on and so forth. So, cell organelles, you can use the same type of pedagogy that NGSS embraces. So, you can maybe teach using models or case studies or something like that. Just a really quick, maybe a week, not even, on cell organelles. They are required in middle school, so you don't have anything to worry about there. And graphing is also so important for any bio course, but for NGSS, graphing might serve, or a graph might serve as a model or a resource that students can use to analyze and form their own questions. So if they are not really solid with their graphing skills, then they're going to be at a disadvantage. So even if you don't have time to take a couple days at the beginning of the school year to go over even just X and Y axes and things like that, then you definitely want to incorporate that more heavily in the beginning of the school year so that students can familiarize themselves with that. Okay, so thank you so much for taking the time to watch. And again, I have a few downloads available in this blog post. There's the general biology scope and sequence, as well as an NGSS life science high school and middle school that you can take a look at. And again, it's just to help keep you on track. It is not written in stone, but if you use it and you use it wisely, then you'll have a nice buffer at the end of the school year. And I wish you all the best. Thanks so much.